This week's episode of Dominaria's Judgment is brought to you by StarCityGames.com and the StarCityGames.com weekly sale. This week, you can bet your bottom dollar that you will save on something, since select Magic the Gathering items are on sale for just $1 from Monday, November 8th at 11 a.m. Eastern to Sunday, November 14th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. Check out StarCityGames.com/sale, that's S-A-L-E, for the massive list of $1 items on sale this week. If you don't find what you need, that's fine, because a new weekly sale starts every Monday at StarCityGames.com/sale, where you can count on great discounts on Magic the Gathering products, singles, and accessories.
What's up, gamers? Ryan Overturf here to remind you to check out the 540, Star City Games' very own Cube podcast, where every week myself and Justin Parnell will be tackling topics regarding all things Cube Draft. We're talking set reviews, digital Cube retrospectives, archetype breakdowns, tons of tips on both how to design your own cube as well as play other people's cubes, with plenty of nonsense interspersed. If you're into Cube Draft, we would love it if you gave us a listen, and if you're not, maybe we can fix that. Check out the 540 every week right here on StarCityGames.com and wherever you find your podcasts.
This week's episode of Dominaria's Judgment is also brought to you by Coalesce Apparel, your first stop for Magic the Gathering inspired stylings. Visit coalesceapparel.shop to pick up a t-shirt inspired by fan-favorite Magic personalities, a hoodie from your favorite guild in the Ravnica University line, or just signal your intent to snag Keep in the Dark with an anti-Mulligan Mulligan Club sticker. Want to splash up a commander deck? Check out the Keeping It 100 sticker line and see if your favorite commander shows up there. Whatever you order, use code SCG at checkout to save 10% on your purchase at coalesceapparel.shop. Coalesce Apparel. Nobody made what they wanted, so they made it themselves.
Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 31 of Dominaria's Judgment, a weekly modern podcast brought to you by StarCityGames.com. I'm Dom Harvey, I'm here with Ari Lex, and there were no tournaments this week! We're finally free!
I expected at least like 7 or 8, but we've just got some modern challenges. So, let's go back to the nice, normal, casual couple challenges, some weird stuff happening, and discuss what's going on.
Yeah, and the challenges this week do point towards some pretty big developments that might be happening in the format at the moment. So we'll start with the Saturday challenge, a good day for friends of the show, at least in spirit. Some familiar faces here. Mana Symbol continuing their amazing run with the 4-color creativity deck, winning the whole thing, beating Belfi with their unique take on Living End in the finals. And then the rest of the top 8 is more conventional. We've got a hard Grixis control deck with Lurrus, of course, Blue-Eye Kahira, a Grixis Shadow deck following Corey Baumeister's tear through the SCG Invitational en route to his victory there, a Black-Red Lurrus deck in the hands of Aspiring Spike. Just at this point, once you've innovated that many decks in the format, you just go to, you come full circle. You just go back to the beginning of the loop and top 8 a challenge with each of them again just to feel something. And then we've got a Jeskai control deck with Kahira, and then a copy of Amulet Titan rounding out the top 8. And that deck finally is consistently either in the top 8s or hovering around them once more.
Yeah, I think that the interesting thing here is that we see 3 Rakdos Lurrus decks. And to kind of spoil ahead, the thing that we don't see in either of these challenges is any Colossus Hammer in the top 8s. And I think that we've kind of entered a spot in the metagame where, I have spent the last, 8 weeks, 10 weeks talking about how you can't play these Rakdos decks because of Sanctifier on Vec. And it turns out that everyone who is not playing Pure Steel Paladin does not have access to that card. And when the Pure Steel decks don't show up at the top tables, then you can actually just get away with some pretty easy wins. I do want to call out Turok in Aspiring Spike's deck.
Yes.
That card was really, really impressive in the, I watched some of his run to the top 8. That card looked really, really good. Protection from white in a format where Solitude has spiked in popularity and price is pretty great. The actual him part of the card is pretty great as the metagame slows down and you actually want to get these 2-for-1s. And it's really punishing. Your opponent is leaning heavily on Fury and Solitude. And when you're hemming them on top of them throwing away cards to deal with your early threats, it's pretty brutal. And also on top of that, Kroxa just looked really good. So the spread of Rakdos threats is pretty nice right now. Still not a fan of Dothy Voidwalker, but only 2 copies in Spike's list, which is probably a totally acceptable number.
We mentioned Turak as a smart call in the sideboard of the Gyruda deck that we featured in Nonsense of the Week last episode, and every other part of that deck turned out to be nonsense, I would argue, but Turak is the one thing which I think you can poach and use in one of these Rakdos Lurrus decks, or just a more conventional good stuff modern deck as a tool to beat Blue Eye and the 4-color decks, and I would definitely expect to see more of that. And as you mentioned, 0 copies of Colossus Hammer in the top 8, a rarity at this point. You can almost always pencil in at least 1 copy of Mono White Hammer, Orzhov Hammer, whatever the splash do is. So don't have to be as worried about that. And then even if you do get paired against Hammer, you see some movement away in recent weeks from Sanctifier towards stuff like Core Firewalker to really double down on the burn matchup. And then even if you are against a Hammer deck with Sanctifier in the sideboard, if you think that you are favored in game 1, and I think you have reason to believe that, then if you have the tools to compete in games 2 and 3, and they're not always on a high number of Sanctifiers, and they're not always going to draw them, I think you can take those odds. And one thing we do see is a lot of the Lurrus decks in particular really emphasizing engineered explosives. We've seen that card be great time and time again against Hammer, but it also happens to be one of the best tools in the Rakdos colors against Sanctifier in particular.
Yeah. I actually don't think that the Rakdos decks are favored against Hammer in game 1 scenarios. I've had too many experiences where the Hammer deck just gets to like split all of your everything with an Urza Saga and it just ends up terribly. But like you said, if there's only one Urza Saga or one Sanctifier in back in the sideboard, and as people start main decking Thoughtseize, I think that that's like a pretty big drop off in quality against this Rakdos deck, because once these Paladin decks, once they have Thoughtseize in the main deck, they're starting to draw these hands where they're like just playing the cardboard exchange game, and that's how they lose against the Rakdos decks. They really want to be playing this game where the Rakdos deck is forced into unprofitable exchanges up the curve. And when you're trading a mana and they aren't, that's like the literal reverse of what you want. So I think the Hammer decks have just kind of moved in a direction that makes the matchup closer in a lot of ways. So probably can accept the margins.
I do think with Hammer, you see some of the same discussion that you see with like Legacy Delver, for example, where it is the consensus best deck, and yet everyone seems to think that they have a fantastic Hammer matchup. And when you press them on the reasons why and you dig into that, is, oh, well, I have some removal spells in my deck, so I must be good against Hammer. And that's really not how that works. You need a cohesive game plan backed up with ideally several pieces of interaction in a narrow time window to win a lot of games against Hammer. And that's a tall order. And I think there's also some of what you see with Isn't Murktide in the past, where the deck fails to top 8 a single challenge, and suddenly it's a new order in Modern. The previous king is dead, long live the king, and then the very next day, usually the deck is back in full force, and you wonder what all the fuss was about.
Yeah, it's the best deck can't win every time. The best deck is only 7 to 8% of the metagame. Even if it's winning. It's not winning more than a few percent more than everything else. The odds of it totally missing a top 8 are, well within bounds. 2 in a row might mean something, like this weekend being completely devoid of it might mean that things are like kind of awkwardly hostile for it. But I still don't think you're wrong to be playing Hammer at this point. It's just such a good deck.
And those 3 Rakdos Lurrus decks in the top 8, each of them is quite different philosophically. So you have the more controlling version where you're not... It plays out quite differently from the traditional like DRC Ragavan decks, even though they have a lot of the same cards. And then within the DRC Ragavan decks, you have this split between this conventional solely Rakdos version in the hands of Aspiring Spike, who really helped to put that deck on the map months ago at this point, and then the Grixis Shadow deck, where you have an entire third color and also this Death Shadow dress down subgame, which forces you to both build your deck differently and then play a lot of the games differently too. So even though we're grouping all of these together to identify a larger trend, in practice, each of these decks is going to be quite different.
Yeah, I don't really have strong opinions on each of them. I think that weirdly, they all kind of have similar weaknesses and strengths. So it's just kind of like, choose your own brew and battle with what you want. They do have distinctly different play patterns, but I think that the cards that are defeating you and the play patterns that are defeating you are very similar across all of them.
Mm-hmm. And then moving to Sunday, Isn't Murktide wins the whole thing. No surprise there. And then looking at the top 8 in the big picture, you think, okay, it's a lot of 4-color good stuff piles. Nothing to really remark on that either. But when you look at these deck lists, the Zoomers have done it again. We have a whole new 4-color deck that just dropped, and I think this one is worth getting into in detail. Maybe not right now. Maybe it's worth saving an entire segment or even an entire episode for that. But this is a deck which, card access concerns aside, and this is somehow an even bigger concern on Magic Online than it is in person with this deck, I would expect to see a lot of this, certainly for the Modern Showcase next weekend, for any of the high stakes events on Magic Online. And this particular build, where it's a lot more reactive, it's essentially a blue-white control deck philosophically that has a lot of the same cards as a 4-color deck. So card advantage mid-game engine is Ren and 6, or the flexible kind of 4-drop finisher that maybe can stabilize some games is Omnath instead of yet another Planeswalker. So it's a kind of rainbow blue-white control deck, if you like, and this deck is gaining a lot of momentum. We saw Gabriel Nassif is one of the 3 separate copies of this deck in the top 8 here. I'm sure Canister is going to run through its paces at some point, and I would say this is the deck that has maybe the most hashtag momentum behind it going into next week.
Well, you said this about Canister and Nassif. One, I would like to clarify that you're describing this deck as Zoomer 4-color when I believe Nassif was the progenitor of it, and he's just like the boomerist of Zoomers, I guess.
I don't know what level you're on here. There was a running thing about not giving any credit to the Zoomer who actually originated this, which I think was Levi Sprung. But I think this is a Zoomer Cabal creation, which then, Nassif picked up. And as is always the case with these things, the most established and clouted player who pilots a deck to some success at first is the one who gets credited with this creation. But I don't think that's the full story here.
Okay, I had just seen the tweet by the player who got second in the challenge with it, adding Nassif for the list. I guess it does also credit Levi with creating the deck, but I did want to highlight an exchange between, specifically, you called out Canister and Nassif. They did both top 16 the Saturday challenge, and leading into this, there was a Nassif tweet about going 15-0. The actual words were 15-0, comma, no big deal, with Zoomer 4-color. And then Canister just replies, no big deal, with an 0-5 with the same deck. And Canister was spotted in the previous top 16 with a more Eternal Witness, Yorian classic 4-color deck. So, a little bit of banter back and forth on this one. We'll see over the next few weeks whether the older list, this list, comes out ahead or whether it just kind of splits the difference. But yeah.
And then we did get the perfect conclusion to the storyline here, where in round 1 of the Sunday challenge, both of them on stream get paired against each other with Canister in full Seto Kaiba garb. That donation incentive was met, and Canister, as you would expect, rose to the challenge. And I believe Canister won that match with a combined, I'm going to say 90 seconds on the clock for the 2 players there.
Wait, Canister won the match? I'm seeing Nassif saying he won and sent Canister to the Shadow Realm.
Oh, okay. That may well have happened instead. I kind of zoned out at the moment where, like, the 5th Omnath of the game went on the stack, and it was all like this kaleidoscopic blur together. Yeah,
I was going to say, when both players' clocks are red, the loser is everyone involved. So,
yes. It's everyone. I guess the viewers are the winners, but all of the other 90-something players in the Modern Challenge were the losers there. So I don't know how that balances out in the end.
Yes, the classic Nassif life force extraction maneuver.
Absolutely.
I do want to touch on the 8th place list in this top 8, which was a mono-red prowess list with Giganta. We'll probably get to this a little bit, but I'm kind of interested in revisiting prowess in the near future. And I think that, we're recording this before the Sunday lists get posted. There's some match coverage of, I believe, Nassif playing against it. But I would love to see the exact list and kind of start taking a look at these mono-red prowess decks again. Just because it feels like they're a little bit better against like Solitude and Fury than a lot of the other decks of this type, because I know with Fury, like very specifically, it's hard to take care of 2 prowess threats at the same time with it, just because like the threat of them reprowessing it. And like the deck's pretty good at just like throwing away cards. But there's some tools in Crimson Vow that look pretty exciting for the mono red prowess deck that we'll touch on in the rest of the episode. So I would love to see this list when it gets posted. And I think people should be keeping this deck in mind for the next few weeks.
Yeah, it does feel like the format at large is not prepared to handle just outright fast, aggressive decks. And even though Burn has been a very successful deck in recent weeks, and so people are being forced to show that deck respect, there is some splash damage there where, yeah, the person who shows up with Core Firewalker against Burn, that's going to be hard for your prowess deck to slog through for the most part. At the same time, though, if they're showing up with either stuff like dedicated life gain, where the scaling on your prowess threats lets you overwhelm that if the game goes long enough, or if you see with a lot of these 4-color decks, the way they beat Burn is kind of a wide spread of everything. It's not just some of the cheap removal, it's also spreading seas, as there's Stone Rain Plus against Burn. It's having access to stuff like Force Negation, Flusterstorm, Dovin's Veto to just trade 1-for-1 with Burn spells, and that actually does stymie their progress. And that half of the recipe there is just not effective at all, really, against traditional prowess. So yeah, it feels like this deck is in this weird superposition where on the one hand it's getting accidentally targeted by a lot of stuff in the format, and on the other hand those same decks are just not prepared to beat it on the other side.
Yeah, and I also want to mention that I think Mono Red is distinctly ahead of Izzet. I think a lot of the Izzet strengths revolved specifically around Stormwing Entity, that card's lineup against Fatal Push, and that just doesn't carry over to a format where Solitude is the primary removal spell. So I think that you really want to emphasize the 1 and 2 mana threats that the Mono Red list really applies.
Yeah, you also do have Dragon's Rage Channeler now, and even Ragavan, or this wider spread of threats that you have access to, and so the need for a threat in a second color that has its own setup requirements, that just isn't there anymore. Maybe you splash just for Expressive Iteration and some sideboard cards. I could see that being a decent approach, but to me, one of the main draws of prowess too, that Burn, I guess, could do if it wanted to, but it's a much less clean fit. There is just 4 copies of Blood Moon in the sideboard. That card is, I think, phenomenal in the format. It was going into this week. Certainly now that a new 4-color deck has just dropped to add to that pile of 4-color piles. And yeah, I expect that card stock to only rise even further, and being a consistent, fast aggro deck that never gets locked out by its own Blood Moon seems like a good place to be.
Yeah, that checks out. I will mention, you said Expressive Iteration. There is a card in Crimson Vow that makes me wonder if you need Expressive Iteration. But again, we'll get to that.
Okay. So yeah, I think with that flawless segue set up for me, and I'm going to, take a swing at it and miss it, we'll send you to a short break, and we'll come back with the remainder of the full Crimson Vow spoiler.
If you are looking to sell your Magic the Gathering cards, it's never been easier than selling to StarCityGames.com. With a 30% store credit trade-in bonus and the fastest turnaround time in the industry, there's no reason to sell to anyone else. Visit StarCityGames.com/sell, that's SELL, for details on all 4 of our great ways to turn your cards into cash or credit. Check out our buy list to sell specific cards, ship your cards to us for an offer with our ship and sell program, schedule an appointment with us at Star City Comics and Games in Roanoke, Virginia for the classic experience of selling to a person, or if you are a store or have over 500,000 cards to sell to us, we can come to you. Visit StarCityGames.com/sell for more details on your preferred way to sell your cards, and let us make it the easiest and best experience selling Magic the Gathering cards that you have ever had.
All right, let's dive into this grab bag here, because we do now have the full spoiler for Innistrad Crimson Vow. We touched on some of the early hits last week when we had access to those, but as is often the case, the most appealing cards in the set just, you can never quite predict when they're going to drop. Sometimes it's day one, sometimes it's when the full spoiler gets dumped on us and you have to comb through to see if there are any hidden gems. I did see someone say this week that Unholy Heat was actually in that final day dump for MH2, and you can imagine how different the format looks without that card in it. So you always have to be on your toes, even towards the very end of the preview season. And now that we have the full set, I guess, are there any big picture takeaways for you before we get into some of the specifics here?
Yeah, so we do these top 5s for each set, right? And I've submitted mine, and I had a pretty good quote on this about, so Innistrad Crimson Vow isn't quite Midnight Hunt in terms of how it's going to hit Modern, just because Midnight Hunt was kind of cheating, and it just had multiple good graveyard enabling cantrips, and that's just oh, this is going to matter for Modern. You should pay attention to these cards. But Crimson Vow has a lot of power and a lot of more niche effects that are not really replacing things that exist. It's very similar to Strixhaven in a non-linear way. So I think that there's a lot of interesting speculative additions to the format, but nothing that's like a clear slam dunk is kind of my big picture takeaway for this set.
Yeah, there are no slam dunks, and I think there are some fringe playables, but none of those are the cards that are meant to be eye-catching at a glance. It's not any of the rares or mythics or cards which you're meant to be excited about when you open them, or they're meant to blow you away when you read them. It's a lot of these seemingly innocuous tools which you can slot into a deck, and they just happen to be the best card for the job now.
Yeah, I think that, you were mentioning like late reveals. I think that some of the best cards in the set were among those late reveals. I actually think one of them may have been literally in the last dump. I don't remember seeing it until like towards the very end of preview season. But we'll get to that. Do we want to just start talking about cards here, or is there anything from last week we want to cover again? I guess there's one card that I put a little bit of work into. That's worth mentioning.
Okay. Yeah, let's hear about it.
Yeah, so Cultivator Colossus. I did an experiment where I basically took a typical amulet deck, added a couple lands, and played every game as if I had to go through Cultivator Colossus instead of Primeval Titan. And I can firmly tell you that is bad, as is.
Okay.
There's a problem with amulet where you actually deplete a lot of your resources in terms of like getting lands on the battlefield to cast your threat. I think that for Cultivator Colossus to work, you need the same kind of land density, but you can't be playing cards like Arboreal Grazer. I think Explore might be okay, but you're more in the market for like an explosive vegetation kind of thing, where you actually are going to have leftover cards. Like you need to be able to produce multiple lands with a single card to have the leftovers. And then the idea with Colossus is that you cast it, and then because it turns all the cards in your hand into spells and produces mana, you then like go off again. Like Amulet not being a land here is actually kind of a big deal. So I'm skeptical of it there, but I think the card may have applications in a different shell, like a Valakut one-of or something.
Yeah, I do think there might be merit to one copy as a Summoner's Pact target for when you know for whatever reason that your Titan isn't going to make it through the turn, whether it's because of Unholy Heat or Solitude or some other face-up card, and there's no clear combination of lands you can get that bails you out of the situation, and sometimes you do just get to high roll them with a Cultivator Colossus. And especially if you do have Amulet on the battlefield, if you hit the top, let's say 30% of your flips with Colossus, that's often going to get you a decent chunk of mana back and a fair bit into your deck. And then maybe that translates into, if you have Dryad in play, the moment you hit Valakut, you start just mowing down everything in sight, or you find the bounce land to pair with your Talaria West or vice versa, and now you can chain that into another pack for a Dryad or a Titan or something. So I could see one copy of that card just as another additional threat, because that still is a bottleneck for the deck after all this time, that also does have this unique functionality where sometimes your only hope is to just put your chips in the middle and hope that pays off for you. Beyond that, though, I wonder if you can build a dedicated Cultivator's Colossus deck. I did see a shell on Twitter where someone was thinking of just reanimating this card in a deck that was 30-something on the higher end of that in terms of land count, with a bunch of Valakuts and Triumphs. And so the idea here being that you reanimate this, you tear through your deck. Ideally, you just dump a bunch of Valakuts and Mountains in play at the same time and either win the game on that turn, or you've drawn 10 cards, you've cleared the board, and now you're ready to set up again for the following turn. So I don't know if that approach is better than just reanimating Archon Cruelty and getting to put another 15 spells in your deck in the meantime. But if you're looking for just some fun experiment to explore, that sounds like just a ticket.
Yeah, well, let's segue into a different Reanimator target that was revealed this week that I think is actually quite exciting for the format, and that is Hullbreaker Horror. This is a 5 blue 7/8, and it's kind of the equivalent of Tidespout Tyrant. So it's a 7/8 flash, can't be countered, but whenever you cast a spell, you can either return a non-land permanent to its owner's hand or return a spell you don't control to its owner's hand. So there's a built-in clause that you can't loop your own Mishra's Bauble for Storm. But Tidespout Tyrant is kind of notorious in Legacy for just having people pick up all their stuff. I think that this card, despite the fact that it can't just boomerang all their lands, accomplishes a lot of the same things because of the remand mode. Also, the other thing that had me interested about this is that if you leave up a Consider with this, it's kind of removal proof. It can just pick itself back up if it gets killed. So you have like a pretty good long game cast that like can't be countered, can't really be killed against control. Like it's a pretty big issue to deal with. I don't think it's directly a more powerful reanimation target than Archon of Cruelty, but like it's possible that if you wanted to extend to like 6 things to reanimate, you would actually want like 4 Archons and 2 Hullbreaker Horrors or something like that, as opposed to like a Sarah Emissary that's like, it does a thing as a tutor target, but is not like an actual card, whereas this is like somewhere in the middle and like just a good default thing to bring back.
Yeah, this is the thing in the ice, I believe, that after, 5 point something years has finally been freed. So love the flavor combination there. But also love what this deck might do in Reanimator, for example, where that inbuilt protection, if you have to then discard it again and reanimate it again, I don't know how far that's really getting you, but if you have any aspirations towards hardcasting this, then this actually is the ideal top-end threat, where it's going to resolve, and then once it does resolve, it's fairly easy to protect it, barring stuff like onboard to Fairy Time Raveler, and then that gets to protect their Solitude or something like that. But this is the one card which I've submitted my standard list, I'm about to submit my historic list, and am waiting on this discussion to finalize my thoughts on Modern. And this might actually be the card that makes it onto all 3 of my lists, just because, in Standard, this is the Pearl Lake Ancient that Shaheen Sarani has been dreaming of his entire life. In Historic, this is the Indomitable Creativity target, which your Unexpected Windfalls can also help wrap you into, and is not going to get Archmage's Charmed or anything like that. And then in Modern, you can just persist this on turn 2, turn 3, and get to work.
Yeah, this made my Modern list. It actually was my number 1 card there. But maybe I think it should have made my... I don't know about Historic. I don't know enough about like the quality of Indomitable Creativity targets in that format, but maybe it should have been at the bottom of my standard list. I kind of threw like there's one curveball in there that could have been this or something else or whatever. But not too much standard talk. I think this card's like a pretty clear one of the best bets for Modern. Even if it like there's a failure chance, it might not hit, but it's definitely up there in terms of like likelihood of being relevant.
It does ask you to build your deck slightly differently in terms of your 1 mana instants now get a lot better. So maybe that means the full set of Considers if you weren't playing them already, or like Consider plus Thought Scourer, or whatever other interaction you might have access to. 1 mana instants as a class get a lot better here. I did wonder about this in the context of the Wilderness Reclamation decks that we bring up from time to time, but which we never actually see a fully fleshed out list for, where you have your Shark Typhoons and so on, and those are more flexible in shorter games where you don't have Reclamation. But if you just want a big thing as a Reclamation payoff to control the battlefield and then kill them with, I think this is the best of the bunch, honestly, where even against these control mirrors, eventually you will cast this, it's going to resolve, and then assuming you can protect it from Solitude in that one narrow window, then you're good to go, essentially. And that is an endgame plan you can build towards even without Reclamation in the mix. And when you do have Reclamation, this is a turn 5 play, holding up, Consider, Unholy Heat, whatever it is, Lightning Bolt, and now that's just an impossible brick wall to try and break through.
That makes a lot of sense. I think the only last thing I want to point out is that this is just a blue card. So, one of the things that we've seen in Reanimator is using Archon with Grief as like, it's a black card you can pitch that is not always the best thing in your hand. This is a blue card for Force Negation in a similar role.
I did think about 80 card Esper Reanimator during the week, where it's like, if I just take all the cards I want to put in my Esper Reanimator main deck, I get to 40 something, verging on 50, and at that point I just add 30 lands, I add a Yorion, and I'm good to go. I don't know if it actually works like that in practice, but that is certainly a deck building process you can follow through.
Yeah, I think that every time I've looked at that, I have been concerned about the number of things to actually use with Yorion, but I think that that's a very fixable problem.
Mm-hmm. Let's move on to a much smaller and much more common blue card here. This is Cobbled Lancer. So this is blue for a 3/3. It's a zombie horse, and as an additional cost to cast it, you have to exile a creature card from your graveyard, and then you can pay 3 in blue and exile it from your graveyard to draw a card. So in a format that has not just a Street Wraith, which, yet another application for that card, but also all of the cyclos that you see in Living End. You have the Evoke Elementals, which same again there, and just a bunch of other ways to stock your graveyard at low cost. Stitch of Supplier and a bunch of the other zombie sacrifice stuff comes to mind as well. It feels fairly easy to get this to be just blue for a 3/3, and then the zombie creature type can be relevant with stuff like Gravecrawler, Cryptbreaker, Champion of the Perished. Made my mind jump to like the old Crabvine decks where, turn 2, you have a stock graveyard already, you play this, you return a Gravecrawler, that returns a Vengevine. Now you have, 9+ power on the board for relatively little effort. So it feels like if you're really diving deep into that space, this is a nice tool to have there.
Yeah, I think the key with this card is you just kind of have to admit that a 1-mana 3/3 in Modern is not like the best thing, especially when it's conditional like this. So you have to be working extra to make this card good. And I think the two things you can do is, zombie synergies. As we mentioned, this is a totally fine one for Gravecrawler, Hedron Crab style decks. But I think that if you are not like an all-in dredge deck, but like somewhere in the middle in terms of like how hard you're dredging, the exile clause on this is pretty relevant, where you just have like a free card loaded and ready to go if you hit it.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any horse tribal aspirations with this card?
Sadly not. I think the zombie stuff is a more realistic payoff there. But hey, if you can make the Cobbled Lancer Crested Sunmare deck work, then more power to you.
I'm pretty sure that is the only horse tribal card, especially because this card does not have horsemanship. Moving along on the list, the next card down is Patchwork Crawler. You had dropped this here, and I'm interested if there is a specific combo with this card. This is very similar to like cards that we've seen in the past, like Skill Borrower. And this is a 1 and a blue for a 1/2 zombie horror with 2 and a blue, exile a creature from your graveyard and put a +1/+1 counter on this. And then it gains the activated abilities of all cards it is exiled.
Yeah, so the first thing to note about this card is that unlike Necrotic Ooze, which is the most obvious comparison, or you mentioned Skill Borrower as well, this does not inherently have those abilities. You have to pay mana for this Patchwork Crawler to gain them, and then even if you copy the Patchwork Crawler somehow, it won't have the ability, and that creature that you've exiled is not around to exile with a new one to gain the abilities there either. So stuff like Kiki Jiki is not the easy infinite combo that it is in a lot of these setups. So you have to get a little bit more creative. So I think the most obvious thing beyond that is just stuff like Grizzlebrand, for example. If you can ditch that one on turn 1 somehow, play this on 2, turn 3, you activate this, you copy your Grizzlebrand, and now you're theoretically off to the races. There's obviously some work to do beyond that to actually convert those cards into something, and you're not making a Grizzlebrand, you're not attacking for 7, gaining 7 life, so that might be a barrier. But that's, the first place your mind might go. There is a combo which... back in the day, I don't know if this is still functional under the rules actually, but people played Necrotic Ooze with Civilized Scholar. So this is the 2 and a blue looter from, I think, the first ever Innistrad set, where you tap it, you draw a card and discard a card. Then if that card was a creature, you untap it and transform it. And if you're able to graft that ability onto something else, which only has one face, then you activate it. You draw a card, you discard a creature, you untap it, you try to transform it, but it can't do that, so the creature just stays where it is, and then you get to go again. So you basically, it's almost like a Cultivator Colossus. You get to ride this wave for as long as you have creatures to draw, and so you could set that up with, dredge creatures, so you're just looping that endlessly to get through your entire deck, or if most of your deck is creatures, then you just get to probabilistically converge on this ideal end state there. Again, there's this missing part 3 of, all right, well, now what? What are you doing with that? But I believe that does actually still work.
Yeah, I believe it does. Interesting, a copy of a Civilized Scholar also does the same thing if you're thinking down those roads. So like something along the lines of like a Seance would do the same thing. I'm skeptical. So the Grizzlebrand thing has me skeptical because you could already Footsteps to the Goryo a Grizzlebrand and just have like a non-attacking Grizzlebrand on turn 3. And then with that and Goryo's Vengeance, you have a lot of ways to just actual Grizzlebrand them. But I think that these alternate combos might be the way to go, where it is color shifting the Necrotic Ooze stuff going on there and kind of making it a little more streamlined.
Yeah, I don't know if your reanimation payoff card being in blue means you don't actually need all the black stuff anymore, even though that is typically one of the better setup colors for any graveyard shenanigans. If you can just be, maybe it's just like blue-red, for example, even. I don't know, that maybe that opens some new doors there. Let's, unless you have any applications in mind here, let's move on to another looter-adjacent effect, which has higher aspirations.
Yeah, are you talking about Jacob Hauken Inspector?
I am, yeah. So this is 1 and a blue. You get a looter, you can tap it to draw a card and then exile a card, and then you get to pay 4 blue. If you do, you transform it, and the backside is you during each of your turns, you may play a land or a card exiled with Jacob Hauken without paying its mana cost. So instantly your mind jumps to visions of, you know, casting Emcor the Aeon Storm for free, or Enter the Infinite, or really, once you get there, it doesn't really matter what you're doing with it. The question is, how consistent is that setup in the first place? And given that it's 6 mana in a format that doesn't actually have real mana acceleration anymore, and then the gateway to all of that is you need to untap and keep your O2 around, I'm not optimistic, but it's, again, one of these fun fringe combos to build towards.
Yeah, this is one of the cards I liked more in the smaller formats. It was on my standard top 5 list. I am less skeptical of the part where you have 6 mana than I am of the part where you have untapped with an O2 and are like, I'm doing it. I think this card is just a little too fragile for the format.
Yeah, maybe if the blue-red Through the Breach Emrakul deck was still a thing, and this is like, once they take out all of their small ball creature removal, then you get to sideboard this in as this weird, like, alternate win condition that also filters your draws. But as it is, in a format that has, like, Solitude and stuff already, I haven't seen an actual Emrakul the Aeon Storm in quite a while, unless there's only as a 15 drop in your sideboard to board in against mill. Like, that's really the only context I see it in these days. And so given that, yeah, I don't have high hopes for this one, but cool design and nice to brainstorm with.
Yeah, let's hop on over to the next blue card here. This is a blue-red one. This is Wandering Mind. This is 1 blue-red for a 2/1 flyer, and when it enters the battlefield, you get to look 6 cards deep for a non-creature, non-land card and put it into your hand.
Yeah, so clearly a really nice, riff on the Augur of Bolas style effect, which is much more consistent and much more flexible. And so you're missing on this one a lot less. And then do you have an obvious home for this? Or is this more of a, when the right thing appears to be digging for, just keep this at the back of your mind in case you need yet another way to set this up?
I think it's more of that. I mean, it's just like about the right rate and about the right number of cards to show up as like a 1 or 2 of kind of digging thing. I don't quite know where the right place is, but it feels like the most efficient card for this kind of entire package.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe there's some kind of ephemerate deck, but then that deck inherently wants other creatures to ephemerate at the same time. And then once you start a deck list with all of these cards, you're running out of good targets to be digging for over and over again with your Wandering Mind. And that, I think, is the central tension here. It's that if there's an existing card type that you have other ways to dig for, so your creatures or instants and sorceries, there are always going to be more efficient ways of doing that. So unless your entire deck is built around like 1 enchantment, let's say, or 1 planeswalker even, and this happens to be, even in the modern card pool, like one of the few ways to get towards that specifically. Other than that, I don't see what this card is really doing for you.
Yeah, I agree. Moving on down to Graph Reaver. This is 1 and a black for a 3/3 exploit. Whenever it exploits a creature, destroy target planeswalker, and at the beginning of your upkeep, Graph Reaver deals 1 damage to you, notably a zombie warrior. Just kind of notable because it's like similar role to Grist in the Yawgmoth decks, where it's just like, this is an arbitrary, like, not super great, but acceptable card, and it can take out a Teferi or a Wrenn and 6 on the spot.
Yeah, and Wrenn and 6 in particular is the bane of any small creature deck's existence at the moment, and so having a nice way to answer that at a profit even sometimes, if you're getting a benefit from that exploit trigger, and then you have a good body lying around, you haven't had to trade down on mana against Wrenn and 6. This is one of the few ways to actually answer that cleanly. And if you look at this Zuma 4-color deck, it's Wrenn and 6 and 2 different Teferis and Jace the Mind Sculptor. Same thing with the creativity deck that won the challenge on Saturday. Is Renin 6, Teferi, Jason Mind Sculptor, and Nahiri as well. So so many good targets for this card lying around, and it's nice that you have the buyout here of it's just a 2-mana 3/3, and sometimes you can still exploit something even if you don't have a Planeswalker to kill, right?
Yeah, you exploit and then it triggers and finds no target, so it's totally fine.
Yeah, so hypothetically, you have a citrus supplier or you have something that pays you off for something dying, you can get that regardless of the actual text involved.
Yeah, the main thing that kind of makes me a little iffy on this is I know I've talked about like Imperial Recruiter in a lot of zombie shells, like just as like an arbitrary thing that is good to vial in when you control a Goblin Bombardment. And it's kind of disappointing that this card doesn't really fall neatly into any of the like good modern creature tutor setups.
Yeah, it is nice with Lurrus, where you can recur it with Lurrus, or you can recur the fodder with Lurrus, and so you can contend with their Planeswalkers that way. I wonder if maybe in Yawgmoth or something, where like you can chord for exactly 2, and you're going to have a Young Wolf or whatever lying around, and this lets you blow up a Planeswalker like a turn ahead of schedule, which against a Planeswalker, leaving that around for an extra turn is usually at least another card and maybe more.
You're thinking as like these decks playing 3 Grist could be playing 1 of this and 2 Grist. That makes some sense.
But potentially, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let's kick it along to another black card. This is Blood Fountain. The effective text box is black 2 artifacts, but it is a black artifact, enters the battlefield, makes a blood token, which are the new tokens where you can pay 1 tap, sack them to discard a card and draw a card. And then it has 3 black, sacrifice Blood Fountain, return up to 2 creature cards from your graveyard to your hand.
Yeah, this, as of the time of recording, this may not make it to publication, but as of right now, I think this is going to be my number 1 card in the set for Modern.
Really? I looked at this card and I couldn't figure, like, I respect that it is doing the 2 artifacts for a single card thing. I kind of wondered why this was not just Cookbook.
Yeah, I think the answer is maybe it's both. So I think the most natural home for this is in an Asmo deck that is more heavy on the artifact synergies. So if we think back to like the Dimir Asmo decks that had Thought Monitor and Urza, Emery, and so on, in those decks, this is another way to get 2 artifacts of some kind on the battlefield as of the first turn, and the blood token also is a discard outlet for your Asmo if you've drawn that, but you haven't drawn a cookbook or another enabler. And then once you have at least 8 ways to just start flooding the board with artifacts right away, that lets you lean even harder on these affinity, improvised cards, maybe stuff like Metallic Rebuke gains a lot of value then. Even Battle at the Bridge is an old favorite. I think there's stuff you can do in that space, but then also if you're just some kind of artifact deck. So I wonder about like, is there some blue-black conventional Urza deck, maybe with World Invention still, where this is like helping to turbocharge that, or I don't think you can use the blood token itself to great effect in that shell, but like maybe you're discarding Sword of the Meat to get it there and draw a card, or if you are a World Invention deck, you're going to have a bunch of these fairly situational one-offs, and so if you draw one of those, you can catch it in for a new card. It seems like there should be something in that space, maybe. I know that when AFR was previewed, I mentioned Deadly Dispute as a card that you could build around in some kind of artifact deck, and this is a source of not. I guess it's not food, it's blood, but you see where I'm going here. It's you have a bunch of widgets and you move the widgets around and you do the thing, and then you do need to actually take a relevant game action at some point. But this lets you just help build that initial machine.
Yeah, so the answer to why is this not Cookbook is why don't we stop? Like, why would we stop it for Cookbooks? Okay, I buy that.
Yeah, it's either I want 8 Cookbooks, or I would love to have Cookbook, but I don't really want to be discarding a card at first and then after that point. So I think it is a niche, but it might not be the right niche.
That's fair. I have a little pet interaction to call out here that might be more of a pioneer level thing. But a card that I just like have tried to make work for, I guess, 8 years now, 7 years, however long it's been, is Strength of the Fallen. This is a card from Journey to Nyx, 1 in a green enchantment. It has Constellation. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, target creature gets +X, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. It is consistently a lot to create a deck that is like self-milling and has enchantments and creatures, like because you're counting creatures, but then also accumulating triggers off enchantments. It's just a lot to ask. And it feels like the disturb cards from this set that are auras kind of just like fit this exactly, where they're like creatures, but also enchantments, and are also good with self-mill because you're casting them from the graveyard. So like, I just kind of wanted to call that little bit out. Maybe Strength of the Fallen is like sort of scaling into something here. Yeah,
there was in that standard format, there was an Irish player, Stephen Madden, I think, who won a PTQ for Pro Tour Dragon Stuck here, and then went, I think, 8-2 at the Pro Tour with this green devotion deck with this Strength of the Fallen package in it, which to this day is still one of my favorite constructed decks of all time. And so you have my attention here. You have the right audience, but someone other than me will have to put this deck together, but I will be there waiting when they do.
Yeah, it is kind of tough because a lot of the disturb costs that actually produce an aura are like fairly expensive. But some of these are just like lifelink. Lifelink is one of the best possible things, like, and double strike. Like, those are two of the best things you could be adding on to a Strength of the Fallen trigger. So maybe there's some way to tie this all together. I haven't quite thought beyond like, ooh, this does a thing.
I think you're right to aim this probably at exactly Pioneer, where I think Theros Beyond Death actually may have given this idea a shot in the arm with both Alseid of Life's Bounty and Hateful Eidolon as 1-mana enchantment creatures that have lifelink, which you can just send to the moon and then gain a bunch of life in the process.
Yeah, the enchantment creatures were always the hardest part to stock up on. Let's get into something a little more practical. And I think this is a card that I missed on my top 5 list and maybe should have been the top card. This is Cemetery Gatekeeper. This is the cycle of mythic rares where they like you exile cards from graveyards and they queue on types. This is the red one. So 1 in red, 2/2 first strike. When it enters the battlefield, exile target card in a graveyard. And whenever a player plays a land or casts a spell that shares a card type with the card you exiled, it deals 2 damage to them. This is just Ankh of Mishra, right? Like, you just fetch, play this on 2, and your opponent's just like, oh, whenever I play a land, I take 2 damage.
Yeah, worth noting with Ankh of Mishra, and maybe, I don't know if this is true of Ankh, but not of this, or vice versa, but either way, so this only triggers on playing a card of that type. So if you play a fetch land, for example, you take 2, then you take another 1 to crack the fetch land, but then the land you're fetching does not trigger this yet again. So you're not taking the full 5-ball there just for using your Flooded Strand.
Correct. Zozu the Punisher and Ankh of Mishra both hit on every land entering the battlefield. This does not quite do that, but at the same time, I don't know if I really need it to be doing that. Like, it's already a 2/2. So this kind of feels like in the Eidolon of the Great Revel range, where like you're just on the play against an opponent and they're just going to take 4 damage for no reason because this card exists and took care of a fetch land.
Yeah, I think the crucial thing with Eidolon is that often it would either lock people out of the game by itself, or they would have to answer it, but then answering it would in the process cost them at least 2 life, and so you were still getting some kind of immediate return on this. My concern would be, I play my Gatekeeper, they untap, they use their Unholy Heat, Fatal Push, Lightning Bolt on it, and then just go on with their business. Or, this against an active Ren and 6 is kind of embarrassing. So the fact that this card is so swingy in terms of not just play versus draw, but then also even in the matchups where it's meant to be good, sometimes this is just a 2-1 with very little text. I don't think you can afford to have this as a main deck card, but I could see this as a sideboard option for burn, in the same vein as I know that Harsh Mentor, for example, got a lot of press when it was previewed in that role, and that never really panned out, but you would see it show up in sideboard from time to time, and I could see it filling that same kind of role there.
Yeah, it just feels like the kind of card that accumulates damage at the right pace to be worth it for the cost.
Absolutely. Before we go to a break here, there's one card which I know I must have seen before because I scanned the spoiler, but this name means nothing to me. So talk to me about Dream Shacklegeist.
Yeah, Dream Shacklegeist. This is another card that is probably going to get pushed out by Ren and 6, but this is 1 blue, 3/1 flying at the beginning of combat on your turn. Tap target creature, or target creature doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. Maybe we'll get around to talking at some point about what Spirits needs to operate in Modern. But this feels like something that might, depending on what it exactly is trying to handle, be a better version of Skyclave Apparition for the job of like your expensive spirit that is actually answering threats.
Yeah, I guess this would be better against stuff like Murktide Regent in particular, or I guess the Incarnations is stuff that gets above Apparition's mana value restrictions. So that's a pretty short list, though. And in Spirits in particular, there's so much competition for 3-drops between these and Drogskull Captain, Empyrean Eagle. There's even the Spirit Lord from the last set, whose name I'm forgetting now. So I would be surprised to see this make any waves, but a good one to have in the Spirits box, I guess, if you're that way inclined.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And I think with that, we can kick it to a break and then jump into the next batch of cards, because there is a ton more from the set that is worth at least briefly mentioning.
What's up, everybody? Cedric Phillips here, stopping by real quick to let you know about one of Star City Games' newest podcasts, The Receivables, hosted by yours truly, alongside my partner in crime, of course, Patrick Sullivan, where the two of us discuss Magic sets, both past and present, from top to bottom. On every episode of The Receivables, you're going to hear us talk about the facts of a set, the mechanics of a set, the cycles of a set, the boring stuff, before we get into some crazy stories of when we were playing Magic during the times that the set was legal. We've got a ridiculous award show where we give out awards like the Char Rumbler Award for weirdest card in a set, the Oko Thief of Crowns Award for best card in the set, and a whole bunch more, before we finally decide, hey, what card won the set and what letter grade should we give the set? It's a whole lot of fun. We're having a blast recording them. Hopefully you have the opportunity to listen to it and you enjoy it as much as we're enjoying recording them. Where can you find it? StarCityGames.com or wherever else you listen to your podcast. The Receivables every single week here at SCG.
Okay, let's bring it back here with one of the most curious cards from the entire set, which I know has split opinion pretty heavily already, and this is Blood Vial Purveyor. So this is 2 black for a 5/6 flying trample vampire. Whenever your opponent casts a spell, they create a blood token, and whenever this attacks, it gets +1/+0 for each blood token your opponents control. So assuming no further game actions are taken, this is 4 mana for a 5/6 flying trample, which definitely a good rate to compete with Desecration Demon, Abyssal Persecutor, some of the other natural analogs for this card. And I think in practice, this is going to play out considerably better than many of those.
Yeah, it feels like it is a different class of the big 4 mana flyer. And specifically the 4 mana I think matters because of Prismatic Ending, that being a distinctly harder cost to exile with that card. So I just kind of flagged this as if your black deck needs some giant top end thing, which, to be fair, Lurrus does mean a lot of black decks don't. This is probably the biggest of the big for its cost.
Yeah, it is sad that 5/6 barely qualifies as big in a format with Unholy Heat, and then also, Solitude, or it's got to feel bad to play this. They play Teferi Time Raveler, get a blood token, bounce your thing, draw a card, use the blood token to replace that card with something better. So I don't know. I think the play patterns in the format are not encouraging for this, and I also don't know what deck we're putting this in, where it has to be a beefy black mid-range deck that already cannot play Lurrus for some reason, and so but we also don't have good options that are less conditional at the 4-drop slot. So I think for historic, pioneer, probably standard, I would be more open to this, but I don't really see where this fits in Modern.
Yeah, I'm just calling it out as it is at the top of the heap for this effect. I agree that I don't quite know where that effect would be used, but it's worth flagging as this is the best thing in its class.
Mm-hmm. Let's move on from that to a fairly simple and straightforward common, which I think actually might be the card in the set most likely to see Modern play.
Yeah, this was my safest bet. It wasn't number 1 on my list, but it was a card where I'm this is going to show up somewhere, and that's Wash Away. So this is one of those weird text boxy things where there's some brackets and you're trying to parse it and you don't really know what to do. So it is blue to cast, but it has cleave 1 blue. And we're just going to talk about this it's 2 modes. The 1 mana mode is counter target spell that wasn't cast from its owner's hand. And the 3-mana mode is cancel. You may realize very quickly that this is a 1-mana card that counters something that has been cascaded into that also has a cancel backside. I don't think it takes a lot to like look at that, nod, and be like, yeah, I should consider playing this.
Yeah, it's kind of in the same vein as like a Mystical Dispute, where it is so cheap and so efficient for its intended targets that automatically gets your attention. And then in those games, if those intended targets don't materialize, sometimes you just pay 3 mana and counter that spell anyway, and that's more than good enough.
Yeah, I think that the buyout clause on this is just really important, and like even more so than Mystical Dispute. Like this, it's so clean. I think that there's an easy way to fail when you're boarding in a bunch of like Flusterstorms against, Temur Crashgade, where they're just like, here is a Seasoned Pyromancer, good luck, and your hand is like Chalice, Flusterstorm, some other card that does the same thing. Whereas if you have Wash Away in that spot, you just counter their thing and move on with your life.
Or even against Crashgade, often it's turn 1, suspend Crashing Footfalls, and then you look at the Flusterstorm in your hand and you think, oh, well, I hope some other use for this card presents itself, because that one isn't on the table anymore.
Yeah. I think that it's not like a clear lock that Wash Away is the card you want in that spot, but I expect to see more than 0 showing up for that exact role, because, again, we've seen Flusterstorm a lot. We know its weaknesses, and this card can help shore those up if your deck is prone to having the hands that are exploitable by the alternate plans of those decks.
Yeah, if the mythical blue hammer deck ever materializes, then I could see this there as like a cheap answer to both Cascade cards as a class, and then also, Fury, Solitude, that kind of thing.
No, it's cast. They still cast it from hand. That's the problem.
Oh, okay. I'm confusing with Nyx, and yeah. So is there other stuff then, which, given the actual wording, this would also hit?
I could not really think of anything. Like, you could, in theory, counter like Oxyvagonus out of Dredge, but I'm not really about that life.
Yeah. Okay. This is so it's basically just a narrow Cascade answer then.
Yeah, but it's still a counterspell in that matchup. But like, is Flusterstorm good against the field? It's like okay against Burn, but I don't really love it against like Azorius or anything else.
Yeah, if you have Flusterstorms in your sideboard and you expect a quite narrowly targeted metagame, because Flusterstorm is a good hedge against like stuff, right? You get paired against, I don't know, Mill or Belcher or some kind of weird combo deck, you'll be happy to have your Flusterstorms. But if you think that I need these against Cascade decks, but then the other stuff like Burn is maybe trending downwards and I don't need the help there so much anyway, then maybe this is a good upgrade to those for that one exact reason. Well,
you did say like Belcher. Like, how bad is putting Cancel in your deck against Belcher?
I mean, that's still fine. You're happy to have it.
Yeah, and maybe they'll change the companion rule back, and then we'll be like, oh, we got to counter these from the Exile Command sideboard zone, wherever the hell they come from.
I guess, does this hit Revolver Soul the way I want it to?
No, because that is still cast from hand, I believe.
Oh god, it is. Yeah,
it's in your hand, but it's like in your left hand and not your right hand. It just don't mess that up in paper. Oh my god, let's not talk about that.
Miracles striking once again. Let's move on to a card which has already broken my heart here, and this is Storm Chaser Drake. So this is 1 and a blue for a 2/1 with flying, and whenever it becomes a target of a spell you control, you draw a card. And I don't know if this just says more about me than anything else, but this is not the first card in recent memory which I have wanted to pair with Ground Rift and been explicitly forbidden from doing so.
Well, you get one card.
I can't even cast it.
Oh, right. Well, okay.
I was so excited there, but no, I and now I'm having to find more legitimate uses for this, which is not what I was in the market for.
Well, okay, so maybe you can make it lose flying. Like, you can play Grounded into Ground Rift.
Okay, if I put a Colossus Hammer on this somehow, then we're talking. Because then I can draw a bunch of cards, but then my second Ground Rift that I draw into can target all of their stuff and stop it from blocking my 12/11 Storm Chaser Drake.
Yes, exactly. I am like, this card is like really uniquely powerful, right? Like, even the heroic version of this from original Theros doesn't trigger, like you mentioned, on copies, and it costs an extra mana and isn't even a flyer.
Yeah, I've looked for 0 mana stuff to pair with this, and the only two options are Mutagenic Growth and Gutshot, and Gutshot doesn't really allow you to keep on going with this unless it's previously been Mutagenic Growth, in which case you can Gutshot several times and still keep the cycle going there. But more realistically, this is maybe in the same vein as like a Core Spirit Dancer or a Stram or that kind of thing for a deck that is trying to do something a little bit different, whether it's, I don't know, maybe you're pairing this with the same kind of pump spells you would in Infect, for example, or I don't know exactly what the blend is here, but maybe that's the thing that holds us back, actually, is if there was a 1-drop with a similar effect and then another 2-drop with a similar effect, at that point, you could build a deck that was just based around targeting this and the other creatures with those pump spells over and over again. But in the absence of that, if you need to draw exactly this, then it's tough to get that off the ground.
Yeah, I agree. This definitely has to be redundant in some way. That's the trick, right? Like, this is efficient enough to be good. You just have to figure out the redundancy. I do want to call out another card that I'm pretty excited about in this set that would fit exactly in this deck, but also has other homes, and that's Ancestral Anger. This is red for a... so let's rewind a bit. Do you remember how many crash throughs have been played in Modern in the last 18 months? Because it's a lot up until about June of this year.
Yes.
Okay. So Ancestral Anger is the better crash through. It is red. Target creature gains trample and gets +X+0 until end of turn, where X is the number of cards named Ancestral Anger in your graveyard +1, and then you draw a card. So the baseline is +1/+0 and then draw a card and trample. And then if you just, bingo multiples, you get even better. This feels like a really way better version of Needle Drop. And I think that any Prowess deck is really in the market for this card.
Yeah, I think this is, if this card had existed in the place of Crash Through 6 months ago, I think many of us would already be all in on this thing. As it is with both the Prowess deck and some of those specific cards having been mostly edged out of the format, it doesn't have an obvious home right now, and I don't think this is enough to move you back there. But if you do want to be back there at some point for whatever reason, then I would strongly consider this card. I think this has a lot going for it.
Yeah, and then the other card, I mentioned a card that might push mono red prowess over even splashing expressive iteration, is Reckless Impulse. And this is just 1 in a red, exile the top 2 cards of your deck. You can play them this turn. This is basically the middle ground on casting Light Up the Stage. And I think that given the success of expressive iteration, and to be fair, looking 2 cards deep and not storing one of them in your hand is a big deal. But this card, the 3 mana games of Light Up the Stage were always the biggest issue, to the point where I think that I would be willing to pay the 2 mana mode of it, and it would probably be one of my better cards.
Yeah, and even with 1 mana Light Up the Stage, sometimes the requirement for that is I have to waste a burn spell that otherwise I might have had a better use for, just to bring this down to 1 mana and then maybe re-roll into another burn spell on the back end. And the fact that this doesn't ask you to jump through any of those hoops is really refreshing there.
Yeah, and you also get to preemptively cast it for your prowess triggers. You don't have to hit them with your Swiss Spear and then post combat light up the stage, and it just doesn't work out that way. So I think that this card specifically in those prowess decks, or maybe if you're Bergie storming off, is going to play a role in the format.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What do you want to cover next?
Let's go to Voldaron Epicure. This is Thraben Inspector at home, I guess. This is a 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, you actually, maybe I'm confusing this with something else. Let's fill the air here as I call up Scryfall and refresh my memory. But,
no, you got it right. This is the red 1/1 vampire that pings your opponent and makes a blood token when it enters the battlefield. This is literally Thraben Inspector at home, but sometimes white is not the most artifact conducive color. That might be a bit dated these days. We'll talk about that maybe in a little bit in Nonsense of the Week. But the fact that this is just another 1 mana make a goober that's an artifact and make a goober that's a creature is just always something you should consider.
Yeah, how does this compare to stuff like Insolent Neonate if you have no interest in the artifact tie-ins?
Way worse than Insolent Neonate if you're trying to just do the dredge or discard thing. Definitely way worse there. But I think once you get to the point where 2 game objects is an upside, this is cooking.
Yeah, and if you want a red 1-drop that makes an artifact, I hear Ragavan is getting a lot of hype these days.
Whoa, if that one dies, it doesn't make an artifact. But yes, this is probably a worse Ragavan.
Let's move on to a card that I can't quite figure out. This is Eruth Tormented Prophet. So this is 1 blue red for a 2/4, and if you draw a card, you instead exile the top 2 cards of your library, and you may play them this turn. So when I was getting into Magic in the mid-2000s, there was a vintage deck that was pairing like Ubermask with Bazaar of Baghdad, and like that was the entire draw engine, and that blew my young mind. Haven't been able to recapture that magic since then, but if they reprint Bazaar of Baghdad in MH3, then we're off to the races.
Yeah, I do want to note that this card is a 2/4, which kind of nicely sizes it out of a lightning bolt range. This may be the kind of thing you want to pair with like an Ideas Unbound, where you just are like underpaying for a bunch of card draw that has a drawback, and then like double underpaying for a massive amount of card draw, which in theory from there should just like let you do whatever you want. Maybe this is better in like Legacy, where your brainstorm is 6 cards for, whatever reason they let you still play that card. But, it is like a pretty big amplifying effect at a pretty good rate for Modern.
That sounds pretty nice. I wonder if, let's say you pair this with Mishra's Bauble, and then you're able to set it up so that you crack the Bauble on their turn, and then on your turn, you're drawing a card, but you're replacing that with the Exile too, and so that sets you up to maybe get the most out of all of the cards that you're exiling this turn. Sounds like a lot of work for not that much gain with a fragile-ish creature, but that's kind of the summary for 5 or 6 of the cards that we've got to so far.
Yeah, this feels a little more sturdy than like the Goblin Electromasters of the format, and it feels like it's magnifying on the same scale of like, once you untap with this creature in a Storm deck, the game is going to end this turn.
Yeah. Let's talk about Angie, Maid of Dishonor.
Yeah, this is just another card that I threw on this list in the same vein as Blood Vial Purveyor, where just like, this is just like a lot of stats and like resources generated by a single card. The sort of like pseudo Goblin Bombardment activated ability is also nice if you're in a world where you want to pursue like Claim the Firstborning people. This might not be quite Modern. It might be more for slightly lower power formats, but it is just like a lot of numbers, which one of the things, like the best cards in Modern are really good, and you absolutely have to play with like the Ragavans and Dragon Rage Channelers. But I think that once you like cover your bases on like those, there's still always like this extra like 10 to 15 slots in every deck. And depending on where you take those, the raw efficiency is like, as long as it crosses a baseline bar, is not like as big of a deal. So I think that's where cards like Angie might find their way into the format, where like it does a bunch of things at a totally acceptable rate. And like from that point, it's just like the right card for a specific slot. So I just kind of wanted to highlight it for, I don't know what that slot quite is, but it is, like I said, 4/5 for 4 with a blood token with this other ability. Just like a lot of things at once.
Yeah, I have wanted an excuse to look into Sorin with Bloodcast, and this is a good thing to cheat in with Sorin that also pairs perfectly with Bloodcast and with, I assume, some of the other stuff that would be going on in a deck like that.
Yeah, you make a great point. Sorin, Vampire, this is an important part of what any Vampire in Modern should be doing.
Yeah, I did not get the good 1-drop Vampire, especially in Black, that I really wanted and I think needed from this set for this Vampire stuff to be feasible in larger formats. But here's hoping, I guess. Maybe that one will take us by surprise in a few sets from now and we can come back to this.
Yeah, it is very weird that like none of the 1-drop vampires are Black in Standard. Like I wrote about a vampire deck in Standard, and it's just very bizarre that like they are all red. Just really, really weird. Moving away from like random creatures, how do we feel about Lantern of the Lost relative to like Relic Progenitus, Neil Spellbomb, or Soul Guide Lantern? This is the 1-mana artifact, enters the battlefield, exile target card from a graveyard. So it's, the same kind of thing that like it's the Soul Guide Lantern trigger, but instead of the Soul Guide Lantern abilities, it kind of ties them all together with 1 tap, exile this, exile all cards from all graveyards, and then draw a card. So the Relic of the Progenitus exile ability on a Soul Guide Lantern.
Yeah, so the upsides to Soul Guide Lantern in the past were either you want the exile effect to be free. And so this would come up a lot where you're against some fast graveyard combo deck where maybe you have to like cantrip into your Soulguide Lantern, and then you wouldn't have the 1 mana left over if that were a relic, for example. Or, other reasons like that. This would come up with Lurrus as well, where you want to be able to like recast your thing and then use it again. Crucially, Soulguide Lantern sacrifice itself instead of exiling, and this one takes all graveyards with it as well, so you wouldn't have any other Lurrus food left over at that point. And then one of the other uses for Soulguide Lantern was when exiling one specific card was important, but then also you wanted the entire graveyard sweeper, if you like, available later on. So against like Croxer, for example, if you drew a mid-game Soulguide Lantern against an opponent with Croxer and let's say 5 to 6 other cards, you play the Lantern, you exile the Croxer, and now you have this ready to go, waiting for the Lurrus or the Snapcaster or the other thing that uses the graveyard. Whereas if that were a relic in that spot, you could tap to make them exile a card, they would exile something else, and now the looming threat of the Croxer would mean you would have to pop the relic now, and you wouldn't have as much agency over there. And so with this card, you're kind of splitting the difference between the two of them, but I don't know if how often it's going to come up that exactly this is going to be the best one of the three.
I think that as long as you're not talking about exactly Living End, where like they are putting a large number of cards into their graveyard, but like in a pacing that Relic can sort of keep up, which is saying a lot because Living End is one of the best, graveyard decks of the format. I think that Affinity and Affinity-like decks, this might be the default version of this for those decks, especially if you're like talking about what card are you Urza Sawing for this. And I think this might be the best one.
I do think Relic is excellent against specifically the Murktide decks, where they have not just Murktide, which at one point they're going to exile a whole load of their cards in one go, and so chipping away at that in advance helps to delay that. But then also with Dragon's Rage Channeler and Unholy Heat, if you have a Relic just nibbling away at their graveyard each turn, it's not trivial to get Delirium online through that. And then also if they have to commit to one of those two cards, you then have the Relic lying around to blow them out in response to that. So I think Relic is the best against Murktide, and with Murktide having that banner weekend last time around, and then still being the most popular deck by Bamzing's data in this weekend's challenges, I think that is enough to push me in that direction over any of the others.
That's fair. It is a worthy discussion, and it's just another card in this same kind of, sphere of, acceptable to good exile their graveyard and get value out of it effects. I wonder if this is kind of like, I guess Soulguide Lantern is the best one of these if you are a Lurrus deck. So like it's not even the death knell for that card. It's just another tool in the toolbox.
Absolutely. So I think that's every specific card that we had on this list, unless any have occurred to you as we've been running down the others.
I think there's exactly one card we missed. There was a card I wanted to say was bad, but it's not worth even talking about. But I do want to talk about Cartographer's Survey. This is not a card that I thought was good. And then Jacob Nagro did the math, and it's actually like really interesting. So this is the 3 and a green kind of reworked version of like Explosive Vegetation. Instead of like search your deck for stuff, it is, look at the top X cards of your deck. In this case, that is, I remember the math and I don't remember the number. It's either 6 or 7, is look at the top 7 cards of your library, put 2 lands, not basic lands, any lands from them onto the battlefield tapped, and then you put the rest on the bottom in a random order. So if you are casting this without having found the card Valakut Molten Pinnacle in a deck that has 4 Valakut Molten Pinnacles, you are, I want to say it's about a coin flip or a bit better to hit a Valakut, which is kind of like, okay, but this is ramping you towards a later Scapeshift or Primeval Titan. And then also just finding Valakut when you are a Dryad of the Elysian Grove deck is just such a like massive beating, especially because when you curve like Dryad into this, the natural curve is that you will have 5 lands, cast this, and then you can hit Valakut and another land and just like double nug. Or even if you miss because of the Dryad, if your 5th and 6th lands enter the battlefield off of this and one of them's a Valakut, again, double bolt. Like this card very specifically in that role is very powerful.
Yeah, it's more niche than most of the other ramp effects you might consider playing. But yeah, that curve of Dryad into this in I don't know if it would be in classic red-green scape shift or if you have another specific shelf for this in mind maybe, but that sequence I think is worth exploring. And Matthias Hunt kicked off this Twitter debate earlier by saying that he felt that this was regardless of applications like that this was a much better design than something like Explosive Vegetation, and that received a lot of comments, and I expected to see most of those echoing that back to him, but it seemed to provoke pretty widespread disagreement.
So the only reason I disagree is that there is like a 5% chance of failure, and I think that people really react poorly to that. This was the Elvish Reclaimer problem, where like everyone was like, yeah, Elvish Reclaimer, so cool, and then the 5% of games that it was not cool, you wanted to take the card, tear it in half, throw it into the garbage, like leave the event site, drive home, burn all the rest of the cards in the deck. This has a similar potential for failure, but it's the upside, I think, of just like I'm going to find Valakut is like way higher.
Yeah, I do think that it is a much better design to have because you're not shuffling as much. You're incentivizing like play with specific lands and play a lot of copies of those lands versus, here's my forest, here's my mountain, which I mean, it's effective, but it's not exciting necessarily. And just all around, I think it's a much better template for that kind of effect than the Explosive Vegetations and Migration Paths of the world, regardless of anything else. So if we see this effect as part of future sets, future standard formats, then hopefully it's more in this vein rather than those. So with those specific cards out of the way, what's your big picture conclusions about the set as a whole, whether from a modern perspective, a design perspective, or anything else?
I have a lot of design thoughts that probably don't really apply and aren't worth talking about in the context of Modern. Like just like little things. Like I think that from a flavor perspective, I think it's really great that like the like things in the set are weirder, which kind of is like this lingering influence of Emrakul on the story, like in the moon, and like the moon has been out because it's a whole. Anyways, I don't want to get too far into that. I also feel like on a like larger level, this feels like the Avacyn Restore to the new Innistrad sets, which has all sorts of other connotations. But the fact that we managed to talk about like, I don't know, what is this, like 30 to 40 cards in the context of Modern is really kind of awesome because they're getting a lot of like weird design work out of this set in ways that feel like, I don't know if all of these cards had to be on Innistrad, but a lot of them feel like they had to be.
Yeah, I think it was always going to be tough to follow not just the immediate predecessor in Innistrad Midnight Hunt, which I think was just a good set top to bottom, but then also the combined legacy of all of the prior Innistrad sets, where when you are the sixth set on a plane, seventh set on a plane now.
It's six. We're not counting Avacyn Restore.
Okay,
we can strike that from the record.
6 point something visit to this plane. It's going to be so hard for that set to really feel original and like it has its own identity, unless it's going so far away from that template that it's unrecognizable. So a tough balance to strike. I would have liked to see some of the set specific stuff pushed a little bit more. So like, I don't know if vampires are really going to have legs in it's something not modern, but like standard. I have doubts about at this point, and that's not ideal, especially with how werewolves kind of flopped last time as well. But just the usual discussions there. I think in terms of a individual card basis, there's a lot to like about this set, and a lot of cards which I don't think are going to see play, but they leave me like scratching my head and filing away just in case.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of the norm for Modern, like for the goods. There was like a long run, like around Shadows over Innistrad, where this was how every set looked for Modern, where there was like 30 cards where you're like, that is interesting, we should discuss this. And then like, you know, a year later, like 4 or 5 cards from the set hit the format and like maybe one of them really mattered. I think that's a good place for standard sets to be, because the alternative is like, here is Oko, good luck, have fun.
Yeah, and we had a whole, year and a half stretch of sets like that, where it was, the set will shake the format to its foundations in the same way that it's shaking every other format to its foundations. And that's not a good thing, ultimately. So I'm glad that we have got back to something resembling normalcy there. And with that, we'll leave the discussion of this set behind for now and come back with our Nonsense of the Week.
With this break, I'd like to talk to you about Star City Games Premium. For years, StarCityGames.com has been hosting the best Magic the Gathering strategy content on the internet, and Star City Games Premium is a huge part of that. If you want to see great articles from Pro Tour champions, world champions, and many other accomplished players, as that content comes hot off the presses, subscribe to StarCityGames.com Premium. More than that, Star City Games Premium comes with a host of benefits when shopping at StarCityGames.com. Premium members save 5% on Magic the Gathering Skill product, 10% on singles, and 15% on supplies. There's even special benefits on SCG Tour Online event entries to keep an eye out for when those events come around. All that savings and all that content costs just $7.99 a month. For the price of 2 booster packs, you can be on the cutting edge of Magic the Gathering strategy, getting insights from the best in the industry on Star City Games Premium.
Okay, so we've summoned some familiar faces here to inspire our nonsense of the week here, and among those is Antoine Numbers, I think we've taken to calling them, with you've seen 4-color ephemerate decks before. They have nothing on this. This is the full 5-color ephemerate brawlback deck with some even more obscure blink-ish effects in there for good measure.
Yeah, I just want to start with the Ether Vials. I just really like that we're bringing back the Eternal Command setup with Ether Vial, Eternal Witness. There's 16 creatures. It's a little much, but I just love it.
16 creatures in an 80-card deck, and this is understating how strange that is here, because we have 1 Icefang Rattle as a 2-drop, we have 4 Eternal Witnesses at the 3-drop slot, and then beyond that is 4 Omnath Locus of Creation, and then 7 of the 5-drop Evoke Elemental. So this is not what you might call a conventional Ether Vial curve by any means. No,
well, let's hold up. I want to ask questions about cards in this list that might qualify as creatures. So does the Yorion, how many creatures is the Yorion worth?
I guess... Is the line exactly 1? Is it over or under here? I'm not quite sure.
Well, it's like 1 per game, so it's like an eighth of the deck. Like, it's worth a lot more creatures because you're always going to have access to it. Okay. How many creatures is like Teferi bouncing your own creature worth? How many creatures is Eldamari's Call worth? I mean, that was pretty clearly 4. How many creatures is Wish worth? Because there's 4 of those.
Yeah, so that I glossed over that at first glance, but that is starting to make a little more sense to me, I suppose. Where if, let's say you lead on turn 1 Ether Vial, by turn 3, you have an Ether Vial on 2, and so you get to immediately... wait, no, hold on. No, that doesn't work. Okay, scratch that, reverse it.
Well, wait, no, so Ether Vial turn 1... Wait, no, that doesn't work. Wish isn't worth any creatures. Okay.
We've been bamboozled.
We have. Okay, good. The answer was 0. This was a trick question. So we mentioned some other Flicker stuff. So brought back we've seen, though it is kind of weird that there's like not as much brought back shenanigans here. It's just like, I hope I Fury and Fetch in the same turn to do it. But I do want to talk about Rush Rebirth because that card seems kind of awesome here.
Yeah, so this is a black-green instant 2-target creature. When that creature dies this turn, search your library for a creature card with lesser mana value and put that onto the battlefield tapped. So you pair this with Fury or Solitude, you can get a 4-drop or less, I suppose, of your choice. So that can either be Eternal Witness to pick up the Evoke creature that has just died for your sins. It can be the Rush Rebirth, it can be anything else. But then also, you can chain your free Solitude or your free Fury into an Omnath, and then maybe you play a fetch land, you crack that, you're back up to 5 mana, you keep going again. So you can set up some truly bonkers turns with this deck.
Yeah. I am like looking at the small aspects. I'm looking at the mana, and I do want to say I am almost disappointed that there isn't a fetchable Snowland in your 80 card deck that isn't basic. But, little things.
Look, hey, we have Brought and Rush Rebirth in this deck, among other things, and so I don't know if we can get that snow-covered island there. I really don't.
There's a Canopy Vista. You could just put like the green-white fetchable snow plains forest, right?
I guess so. Props to anyone who can name that one, by the way.
Yeah, it's beyond me. Kaldheim card number 243.
And then we don't even need to get into the 15 one-off sideboard here, which I guess when you have Wish, you can talk yourself into doing that. So this is the true mixture of one-off creatures to bring in so that you can Eladamri school for them in the post-Cyborg games. And then also, we've got like a Chalice of the Void, an Engineered Explosives for our Wish, that makes sense. We also have the one Time Warp for when, we've got our Ren and 6 going, we've got Eternal Winners, and we just need to actually finish the game in some fashion. And so Wish, let's just get around to finally doing that.
Yeah, I'm just impressed that there's not like a sideboard land to wish for, but I'm like also impressed that Gatekeeper doesn't manage to turn off any of the cards in this like 4-color mid-range deck. It's very weird.
Hey now, it turns off Prismatic Ending.
Yep, you got me on that one. Okay, 1.
And with that, moving swiftly on to a much more normal-looking deck, but one that we haven't seen in quite a while, so sadly has qualified as Nonsense of the Week here. This is just good old Golgari food with Asmo and Cookbook and so on. Feasting Troll King making an appearance back in the format, and that one died away even before Solitude was in basically every white deck. But nice to see someone at least trying to make that work once again. And the recent addition, which maybe is powering some of their success, is Ravenous Scroll, which, as we see in this current generation of food decks in Historic, when that thing gets going, it gets out of control very quickly, on top of being this perfect card draw engine or shield for stuff like Feasting Troll King from exile effects. So that card really does it all, and it's a 1-drop, and that it feels like that is tying a lot of this room together here.
Yeah, that does sound pretty good. I would like to explore that card a lot more than these Feasting Troll Kings. Though there might be some Doomwake documentation of this deck. He did attempt to play with this. So not only can you look at this, you could probably dig through the Twitch VODs and maybe get a little glimpse into whether this is madness or madness of the other kind.
Yeah, inferring from your wording exactly how well that went for him, and probably for anyone else who tries this as well. I will say I do like that this is a pretty good laydown of the Void deck, and that's a weird statement to make, given that ideally you are never casting that card, so who cares what kind of deck you're putting it in. But for a deck like this that needs some kind of nuclear weapon to handle, Murktide, Living End, Reanimator, God knows what else, Yawgmoth even, which was one of the original foils to Asmo, funnily enough. Leyline just kind of does it all there, and we mentioned that as a premier sideboard card in Modern at the moment, but there just aren't that many decks that can actually play it, and this is one of them, I suppose.
Yeah, if you draw it, you can discard it to Cookbook. What more could you ask?
You can find it with your Trail of Farms. You have it all going on.
Yeah. Okay. So from a oldie but goodie, we have a, I guess, oldie but weirdie going on here. We've got another 5-color deck going on with the Tunneling Cat showing up with the Magda Pyre of Heroes Changelings deck.
I don't know if this qualifies as an oldie. This is a new kid on the block that we mentioned once because of how delightfully absurd it was, and then it didn't translate into any tournament success, but it's back here in the 5-0 decklist dump with another 20 cards for good measure.
Yeah, I will note that this deck, I think, gets an addition from the next set. So if you look at the mana, it's got 4 Unclaimed Territory, 4 Cavernous Souls, 4 Haven of the Spirit Dragon, but it's also playing like 4 stupid Ancient Ziggurats. And I'm wondering if it is better off with like some amount of Voldaron Estate somewhere in this mana, because you do have a lot of vampires in your deck.
That is really interesting. So let's see. That card, it doesn't cast Ragavan on turn 1, sadly.
Yep.
Doesn't cast Grist. I mean, kind of. It doesn't cast Sanctify Invec in the sideboard here, or Obsidian Charmer. So I don't know. Those Ziggurats might be bearing more load than we think here.
Okay, maybe it's better than the Inspiring Bandages. We'll go that far.
Okay, I can co-sign that.
Okay, yeah. So this is basically every cheap changeling in the format plus Magda, and you're setting up spots where they are tapping to make a bunch of treasures, and then you're sacrificing those to Magda, and then you can get like Karthus, Tyrant of Jund, which untaps all of your changelings. Also, one of those changelings is Mothda, so you can immediately retap all the changelings and make more treasures. And then from there, you can find Sundering Titan or Platinum Empyrean or something. I don't really know what the end game is besides like making a bunch of stuff and your opponent concedes. I guess Mirror Entity maybe. But yeah, like this deck, the screenshots are always befuddling and their opponents are always at like -47.
Yeah, some delightful sample hands with this deck. Perfect Twitter, Twitch screenshot equity here. So love to see this. One of the most delightful decks I've seen in a long time. And the Tunneling Cat has somehow found a way to make it even more absurd and even more delightful. So props to them on that. And then to round this out, you added this one to the notes. And it's a very cryptic note here. It's just Spider Space Challenge deck.
Yeah, so the Saturday challenge results went up, and deep dive to the 22nd place deck is we have Spider Space back to some of their white creature antics that they have for years been known for and only recently deviated from. And this is Oswald Yorian Taxes. So this is a 80 card Death and Taxes deck. A lot of the usual suspects. You got Flickerwisp, you got some Archon of Marias, Esper Sentinel, Giver of Runes, Ether Vial, Stoneforge Mystic. Then it's just also an Oswald deck because like Ether Vial is an artifact and like Esper Sentinel is an artifact. And I guess there's 2 Razor Tide Bridges that are artifacts. And then you get to play Urza Saga and like tutor through to like Crucible to lock your opponent with Tectonic Edge and Field of Rune. So there's a lot of big time nonsense going on here that is interesting. And I actually really like this application of Oswald just as like, not like a dedicated game plan, but like a soft hate card almost, or toolbox in some way. I really kind of like that it's the first deck I've seen using Oswald in a way that is like very kind of like a tacked on game plan to an already not really artifacty deck, but like it just incidentally gets to Oswald people.
Yeah, it does remind me of how some of these legacy Death and Taxes decks, they started with 60 cards, as one would expect. Then they went up to 80. And then once they were at 80, the natural thought occurred of why not try to fit Urza Saga in this deck? And then you had this small artifact package finding its way in there. And then that kind of like suck its tendrils into other parts of the deck. And so the whole thing just went through several rapid iterations here. And I'm sure you could build this deck here in Modern without the whole Oswald nonsense going on. But if we didn't have that, it wouldn't be Nonsense of the Week, and we wouldn't be in here talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely would not be Nonsense of the Week. It is sad that the artifact curve does not continue from 4 all the way up to Cauldron Complete, but that might just be asking too much.
That one's kind of a pipe dream. I guess, does this deck have a Battle Skull? So that gets us to 5. No, it doesn't even have that. Okay, how the mighty have fallen there. But I guess if we put a Battle Skull in, is there a good 6-drop artifact we can play to bridge the gap officially?
Well, there's not even a 4, so you have to answer multiple questions here. I also like the Amaria's Calls, which I don't really think you're going to be doing anything with on the stack, but like as just a card that you can pitch to Solitude, and then if your mill opponent really wants to try and mill you, is just going to run into a brick wall when they Tasha's Hideous Laugh to you. Good stuff.
Yeah, I always loved that application when we saw it very briefly in the Hammer decks. Just this is strictly worse against every single other opponent, and even in this matchup against every other card. But Tasha's Hideous Laughter is so good against me that I just need to hedge against it somehow. And unsurprisingly, that idea did not stick there. But I do love it here, just making sure that when you're flooding, you can still pitch cast Solitude and then clear the way for your actual cards. I would say your good cards because it's a mono white Death and Taxes deck, but for your other cards to at least do what they say on the tin.
Yeah, and I guess one final note on Oswald here. I really like the combination of Oswald and 80 cards and Oswald effectively extending your sideboard slots. Like you'll notice a Thorn of Amethyst, a Grafdigger's Cage, a Pithy Needle, but because of Urza Saga and Oswald, each of those slots hits really hard.
Yeah, I do like that a lot.
Yeah, so I think that about wraps us up. Anything else you want to tack on to the Nonsense of the Week? Any other last notes about Innistrad Crimson Vow? Or should we, see what next week has in store for us? Because every single week of this Modern format appears to be different enough to make it seem like we really need to be keeping up with the future before it even happens.
Yeah, we've just covered consecutive weeks where we've had several different large tournaments going on. And you think if this Zuma take on 4-color, for example, had broken out the week before the Invitational, how different would that tournament have looked in retrospect? Or so even though you have what should be these fixed points in time where a lot of the innovation is happening in the lead up to those tournaments or at that tournament, instead, week by week, there's always new things to stick our teeth into. And that's what makes it so fun to come in here every week and talk about it. But if you have ideas all of you out there for topics you'd like to see covered on the show, whether it's as the focus of an episode in the main segment or just brought up as a talking point at some point, then by all means, do let us know. I'm on Twitter at Darwin Javier. He's on Twitter at ARMLX. And we will talk to all of you again soon. Take care, everyone.